Okay, folks, this is interview number one for the San Francisco Documentary Film Festival. I'm very pleased that Tim O'Donnell is here today for a multitude of reasons. For one, most people know that I like younger filmmakers. Second of all, I like documentary filmmaking. And third of all, the fact that he quit a day job to be a filmmaker is way awesome. So, Timothy, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I want to start off talking about that. Most parents, when you come home, even as an adult, and say, hey, man, I'm leaving a nice job and I'm going to become an artist. I can imagine if my kids did that, I'd be like, I love you. I'm all for the arts, but get a cushion. How did mom and dad react to such a thing?
Yeah, I know it's a funny thing. I had like a very stable career in a lot of ways. I went to college to become a teacher, became a teacher. I was an art teacher at a high school,
Mhm.
and I was also a wrestling coach and great art program, great wrestling team. And I was 6 years in, department chair, really had like that, health benefits and the whole nine. And that thing inside you that's just like, I'm not doing the thing. It's tough too when you teach and you feel like you're not even doing the thing that you're trying to teach. And I started teaching when I was 21 too. So I started right out of college, and I jumped right in there. It was an amazing experience, the foundation of my life in a lot of ways. But yeah, when I started having those early conversations, but I think I'm gonna not only not only leave my job. I was Western Mass. I was out in Springfield, Massachusetts. I'm gonna move to Boston. There's one. Leave my job. And then I met this girl, Allison. We're going to move in together without living together prior, right? We're just going to do that. So huge, huge, big jump. Credit to my parents, some trepidation, of course, but just like, if that's what you want to do, kind of thing. A lot of conversations, right? Like not just, oh yeah, whatever, because they care. But yeah, this film, the house we lived in, has a special place in that moment because I left my job in end of June, and my dad had this injury in August of that year. So pretty incredible when you think about the decision to leave, and then everything that kind of transpired after that.
Oh, absolutely. I found it fascinating because I was looking at your backstory and I know that you have a bachelor's degree in art. And then, of course, you went on and got your master's in film. So it's interesting to me. Art is art and film is considered art, but art is different. So I'm asking myself, okay, so he invested this time in using this art degree somewhat, but then jumped over to film. Why the transition?
Yeah, it also keeps going back to that the film in some ways because my dad kind of taught me how to use the video camera. Of course, I was always interested in traditional 2D media, drawing, painting. In my mind, when I was growing up, I was going to be a painter. I wanted to live the art life. My favorite artist was Francis Bacon. I wanted to be just like him.
Okay.
And moved to London or something. But yeah, I kept having this camera thing, like whether it was wrestling, being at tournaments and filming my older brother who also wrestled, or my teammates and putting highlight films together. It was always there, but it wasn't like art, like I was like, oh, this is art. This video thing is just kind of whatever, it's like a craft. But then grad school helped me because I actually got into grad school with a painting major, or a painting focus. And but within a semester of really some hard questions, and it was a great program at Mass Art, it pushed me to really discover that, no, it's video. And so once that shift happened, there was no going back. It was like, I've uncovered something that I'll forever, if I don't do it, I'll forever know I'm not being myself. So I do think it lends itself though. I'm glad I have like a background in painting and drawing because I think it hopefully helps with composition, and you're just kind of looking at it a little differently. I never went to film school, so I don't have that traditional kind of support or structure, but I think hopefully that kind of helps the path that we've kind of carved out for within our films.
That poses an interesting question because I was thinking about that today. I thought to myself, well, if you have an art background, is it possible because of that you can see the story in your head before you're actually filming it? Did that help you in terms of enhancements behind the camera?
I think honestly, there's a bunch of answers for that. Like I
Mhm.
think having that technical aspect of drawing and planning and all that definitely helps. But I think not having like film school let me do a lot of stupid things that people typically wouldn't do. So like saying yes and just going, as opposed to like, well, we need to do it this way and that way. And we started a company called Pixella Films, and so everyone in part of that is kind of has that kind of same story, I think, where, maybe we don't have a film background, but, we're all kind of here. We all found our way here with maybe backgrounds that kind of, support and lend themselves a little bit to it. So I think that's the biggest thing for me is like, I know if I went to film school, I wouldn't have done certain things or made like a ton of mistakes or shot things, in this particular way. It almost kind of opened it up a little bit. And I had to learn as I went because of course you can't, it's not like there's just no rules. So yeah, just kind of a different approach, a different angle.
Sure. Now we're meeting for the very first time, but as a journalist, of course, it's my job to creep on you. So I was on social media and I can assume that the child I saw is yours.
Yes.
So I'm curious to ask a question about that. Oftentimes when we become artists, we have this overwhelming desire to kind of seep that special cool gift that we have of artistry into our children right away. So tell me a bit about what it's like to try balancing having a film career, because obviously your personal life always trumps the professional life, but it's got to be difficult to manage both.
We've got 2 kids now, so it's 4 and a 2-year-old.
Oh,
Yeah, no, and so it's a funny thing of, and I think it goes back a while ago, and it's connected to the film a little bit, that my wife saw that early on in me, that I have that, I don't want to say workaholic, but just that thing where it's I'm constantly in it. It's the double-edged sword of doing something that you really love and care for. And I totally, like, I know people who just don't do that thing because it takes over their life and it's problematic. When you do something you love so deeply, sometimes that isn't good, for the overall balance of your life. So we worked on that. Luckily, I worked on that before kids came. So, and it still happens, it's not like I'm bound to like get busy, get going. And then it's not even a time thing. It's not like I lose time with my kids. It's that my mind is just in it. And, I put the kids down and I come up and I work, that kind of thing. And that's problematic. The beauty of my career is I get to be home a lot. We
sure.
do commercial work too. And, documentary films, everything's woven together in our yearly schedule. What that means is, sometimes I'm on set, sometimes I'm traveling, but majority of my time is here. And then I'm hanging out with my kids and getting to kind of experience that in a way that I feel like, most people don't, or previous generations or whatever. Like, it's really nice, but that you got to balance it. And it's easy for your passion to completely kind of, with this film too, it became an obsession, and it was problematic for my own mental health. And I needed to calibrate that quite a bit over the 10 and a half years of making it, because it's a personal story and I care so much about it. So, but you learn a lot from that. And then hopefully you can kind of scaffold that for the rest of your life with, making choices that aren't going to kind of hurt your family or yourself,
Now, is your wife also an artist? Because I find that usually when partners are creative together, that chemistry is just amazing then.
Yeah, she is. So she is a producer, co-producer on the house we lived in. She's, produced a lot of different films. When we had kids, she shifted a lot of her focus to that,
Sure.
being, there, full time, more than full time, because it's not just full time. It's a, double or triple job. But yeah, and she has a background in English, went to law school, has been involved in a lot of wonderful nonprofits, and always involved in every single film that we make.
Oh, that's awesome. Is there a way for folks when they're listening to this today, couldn't they look her work up, or how do we find information about the project she's done?
Exactly. So if you go to pixellafilms.com, you're going to see a list of films, and you'll see some credits in there. And we've got a wide range of documentaries, short and feature, and really kind of across the board with subject matter.
Sure. Now, before I ask you the question about documentary filmmaking, I want to mention this, of course. Most people may not know that you are Emmy nominated. Now, I've talked to other award winners before, and I asked this question because I think it's helpful to other filmmakers. Sometimes what happens is when somebody becomes nominated or they win a larger award, the expectation within the industry becomes much more extreme, meaning that you're at that level where you expect more out of yourself, as do they. So do you feel added personal or professional pressure when it comes to doing projects now that are even beyond your dad's project?
No, just because I think it's my mentality, and like I feel like I'm just playing and having fun. I think about wrestling, I think about like high school and college. I know it sounds crazy. I'm 38 and I still think about wrestling. Like I still think about matches. It's sad, but it's good because it's like this weird foundation that is film school for me. That was film school because it was the work ethic and the
Sure.
like getting beat up, like because in film, like it's so personal. Like people go decades trying to make films, write scripts, and getting cut down. It's incredible, some of those stories that you've never heard. And for me, I felt that with wrestling, just one will against another. And so all of it's kind of gravy, the fact that, yeah, we got nominated for an Emmy for a short doc, was picked up by ESPN. That was awesome. What a great experience. Great subject matter too. That story put on a lot of exposure for this young kid who had speech apraxia. I don't know if you're coming to me with your judgment or your kind of expectations, like I'm going to try to communicate clear what I can do, what's I'm capable of, what I believe in. Outside that, there's just a lot of BS that I don't need. And, I think as we've moved forward in the entertainment industry, I think a lot of that hopefully is kind of moving aside, and we're getting to see newer filmmakers, we're getting to see new approaches and representation. So yeah, for me, luckily, but I get it. Like, you do something and you get that thing in your head, and it can be problematic, shackling you, right?
I did mention that you were at the San Francisco Film Festival, so I'm all about shameless promotion. So were there certain projects or certain things that you saw outside of your own film, of course, that you'd recommend or say to people, hey, you know what, if you get a chance to see this screening, go do it?
Yeah, I think like in the Bones, that was awesome. I'm terrible at names, so I hate. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like the short documentary packages were really strong too. So thinking about film festivals is I love seeing the films that you might not get to see, like, obviously
Right.
HBO docs, and you can just kind of see some of the backing, and it's great to see them. Some of those films you need to see, but getting to see a film that otherwise might be challenging to find for a full wide distribution. And I love seeing short documentaries kind of put together in packages. I feel like festivals, especially San Francisco, did a great job with finding things to kind of make this bigger story, where you get them all. I don't know. I think whenever you can kind of support a documentary film festival, it's awesome. Yeah, it's great.
Absolutely. And very well run and orchestrated and very professional and some excellent projects. I mean, I think I'm covering 9 or 10 other films and they were lovely. I mean, Tribeca's been absolutely wonderful. Gina Davis's festival will be lovely. I want to talk a bit about doing documentary film. It's not for everyone. And one filmmaker once described it as it's the perfect vessel to be able to show a window into the soul that was unseen, which I would agree with 800%. And the primary part and parcel of what you do is documentary. So talk to me a bit about the choice to make documentaries, because I imagine that they are as emotionally charged as they are full of energy and enthusiasm and inspiration. It has to take a toll, like you said. And in what ways have you ever said to yourself, maybe I should just start doing shorts?
One of those things when you start to follow a subject, you get integrated into their life, and you're going to care about it. And how do you balance that type of connection, and then the idea that you're going to be partly putting together a story that's going to represent them. There's a lot of, you that previous question on Emmy nominated. Well, that's the more pressure cooker, right? Of like, you care about this family, this person, whatever the story is, and now how are you going to represent that? I think balancing out mental health is huge, and I think it's like a newer kind of concept for documentary filmmakers is this thing that happens with trauma, where I'm lucky I get to work with a ton of veterans. Some have had, the most incredible trauma you could imagine. We've made films with Mike Schlitz, double arm amputee, 85% of his body's burned. He's Mike though. I mean, he's Mike. He's been a close friend, and we're lucky to tell his story. And I often forget when I introduce people to Mike that I have to explain what happened to him, because he's just Mike to me. But visually, you have to kind of adjust because he looks very different, right, than you and
Sure.
me. And now you have someone you care about like Mike, and you hear his full story and you get the details. And it's not what's in the film; it's what's in the film, but it's also what's not in the film. And that sometimes is challenging to to have that weight, and then also to compare yourself, right? Because trauma is trauma. So if I start comparing Mike's trauma to my trauma of even making this film about my dad who survived, who's whole, and I got to document it all, but that was hard. And I have my own stuff that I need to work through. And I'm not Mike, Mike had to go through what he had to go through. And so, I think it all goes back to the self, and then that calibration. And luckily I have a partner like Allison that has been with me long enough and knows, and same for her, right? That calibration, we keep calibrating each other. And at some point when we start acting different and not being great, that's when intervention like mental health, counselor, therapist, maybe it's medication, maybe it's cannabis, maybe it's whatever, maybe it's not drinking alcohol. So there's all these lifestyle changes, and we're so lucky that our culture's, open enough now. And not that it's great, but it's better, right? To these other ideas of how to take care of yourself. So huge within the documentary field, because you can easily burn yourself out and you can easily make yourself go crazy.
Oh, absolutely. And the other thing I think about is that it took you a significant amount of time to complete this project. And so I'm always trying to tip off younger filmmakers or newbie filmmakers. So if somebody watches this that has not done a documentary, and they get tired, they get frustrated, they get frazzled, they say, you know what, this has taken like 2 years, 3 years, etc. What would you say to them to encourage them to just not throw the towel in?
Yeah, I think it's just like anything, getting your reps in. So like, it's interesting. We've made films before, I even left teaching. I was making films and then decided to leave teaching. And then even within this film, it's 10 and a half years. We made, I think we made like 3 features and like 10 short documentaries within that frame period.
Okay.
And so getting your reps in, because like everyone you meet, that's a good filmmaker is like, oh, I've made a ton of bad films. So like, let's just do it, like, let's just, get your 10,000 hours or whatever. And I got that early because I was filming weddings on the side, which was great, filming weddings, all through college and, as a teacher, summers and things. That was great. I just got my hours that way. Right. But I think like just getting through a project, me and so the co-founder of Pixella Films is John Mercer, and we're lucky we get to work with some interns that are still in college, and that's the first thing is like just do it, just like it's so cheesy, but like just make a film, don't talk about it, just do it. It's gonna suck, that's okay, like but just get through it. And then those bigger projects that you do need more time with, keep working at it, keep chipping away, but just knock out some short films or whatever you can do, even with your phone, it doesn't matter, because just the whole experience of start to finish is such an accomplishment. And anybody that talks about making films, that's cool, but anybody that actually finishes a film, I'm like, it could be horrible, it could be terrible in so many ways, technically and whatever. And I'm just like, awesome, good for you. You finished it, like, because finishing a film is the highest achievement to me. So yeah, I don't know, just getting to finish it and see it. And then the perspective that happens of what you went through and being able to touch a lot of different roles, right? Like whether you're just directing or just, camera operator, but maybe you have a little, maybe you have some work to do with sound, maybe you have, in the editing, and of course for documentaries that are, independent, lowly funded or not funded at all, you are going to have that experience. And that's super helpful for anyone, in the film industry, is to have all those experiences, because that's going to feed into the next phase of whatever you're doing.
Now, before we start talking about your most recent project concerning your father, I do want to ask this question. As a documentary filmmaker, how do you sort out which stories are worth telling? Because they're all worth telling, obviously, but what does your selection process look like?
Oh man, I don't know, which is terrible. But I think there's just like something that just sits with you a little bit, like throwing shit on a wall, see what sticks. And so, same thing with paintings and drawings and everything else. It's like, you could draw anything, you could paint anything. Well, why do you do that? And so I think it's just something that sticks with us. And so it's a collective of not just me at this point, which is great. But yeah, and so we have a bunch of films. Some are higher profile or make total sense, and others don't make sense. And I think usually there's a personal connection somehow, something from the collective. But because you gotta care about it, right? If you're like, oh, I want to make a documentary film about this thing because I think it's going to do well at festivals, I think it's going to make money, but you don't really care about it, it's not going to work because like it's a lot. So yeah, it's got to connect. But I don't know. I don't like people who just like look through
Thanks for
the.
that great answer, Tim.
Yeah,
Great.
that's a non-answer, right?
Yeah,
But
just
I don't
wing
like
it, folks.
I don't like the story hunters. I guess is like the opposite. I guess like and I know a lot of very amazing filmmakers, documentary filmmakers do that. They just New Yorker and NPR story, and they go. And I don't like that. But anyways,
I
backyard.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. The house we lived in. All right. I want to start off. I had a bunch of different observations that I made on this, which will go into the review, but we'll talk about some of them. First and foremost, Todd is your dad. One of the first things I want to talk about is I think it's fascinating that you start the movie off, and I don't want to give away too much for anyone that hasn't seen it. You start off at an event that happens concerning your father, medically speaking. And then as time goes along, I think it's so neat because you do this systematically, meaning like here he is at the start of his journey. Then 40 days later, he's in rehab. Then you're looking at 3 years later, 6 years later, and 9 years later. And what's neat about that is that, at least for me as the audience, I'm thinking to myself, you're just rooting for him all along. Like, I know it's going to come back. I know it's going to get better. As the filmmaker, you piece this together in such a way where we're holding hope. I'm not sure if you knew that or not, but the audience keeps holding hope just as seemingly the family does, correct? I mean, was there a point in time where you ever gave up hope? I mean, besides the obvious.
Yeah, this film's very different than a lot of films we made just because of the nature of it. But early on, I don't think I'm giving away anything either. What he's in a coma at some point. He's in a coma for 8 days. Definitely that towards the end of that 8 days, like it wasn't really expected. Like it's okay to be in a coma for a day or two, but like as it went on, it was kind of like, okay, this is it. And that's where I started filming. And so because it was like, this is it. And because it was hard to be there. And so, yeah, definitely a lot of moments, I think, early on. But once, as the film progresses and, you see his journey, I think there's just something about his eyes and his humor. I think once we got to that point of him communicating a bit, that was just, it was a shift. A lot of tough moments, in between. I think the challenging thing with the brain injury is just like everyone, we have this adrenaline dump, right? I during wrestling season, I would often have like depression after because, you go, and then season would end and you would be left with this emptiness. And like that happens in all facets of life, festival season, whatever, a wedding or something, I don't know. And so we had that, and it's like survive, okay. Oh shit. Wow, now you're different. And that adjustment period, it was a long process for the family. That's part of the story. So yeah, there's the no quit motto that my dad has and we used with him. And I think it was all kind of, like you said, like that hope and that pushing forward that happened quite a bit with my dad.
Prevalent throughout it. I mean, you just keep seeing his consistent fight, just constantly being his own champion, in addition to having this lovely family behind him. You're rooting for him, not only because of the fact that it's such a sad series of events that happens, but more importantly, just because he refuses to give up. I have to ask the question, when all of this was first happening, first off, there's just legality things, because I was asking myself, okay, he's filming in a hospital. So, hospitals don't like those things, just like jails don't like those things. So I have to be diligent and ask if somebody wants to film in a hospital. I mean, how much red tape and just rigmarole was involved with actually being able to do it?
Look, you can't film in an ICU, period. So I was filming with my phone, and I, at some point, even asked, and they did not allow me to bring in like even a small DSLR camera.
Okay.
And so everything was sort of illegally shot, you could say, in some ways. But as he progressed, we made a short film called No Quit, which is kind of his motto. And that ended up being adapted by ESPN. This was like a year or so right after he fell. And the hospital ended up using that film, the short, it was like 15 minutes, both at the medical center where he started and then Spalding Rehab, as a tool for new patients and family members. So
Nice.
yeah, I mean, sometimes you got to break the rules or whatever, obviously I never try to like encourage young filmmakers to get in too much trouble, but not the first time I've been told not to do something or,
Kind of
censorship.
unlike us New York filmmakers that are like, it's 3 a.m. and you want to film on the subway, you know what you need to do. It's called guerrilla filmmaking. You run your
Yeah.
ass on there with the camera and you go do what you have to do before they catch you or arrest you or ticket you. See, we like that whole guerrilla thing. But again, folks, don't listen to me. I mean, you don't want to get yourself in too much trouble. But sometimes, to get the shot, you have to do what you have to do as far as that goes. Again, because of the sensitive subject matter, was there ever a point in time where Todd, that would be your dad, ever said, turn the camera off? I can't take this. I don't want people to see this. It's not their business, etc. Did he ever feel invaded by you doing all of this filming?
Yeah, great question. And I think, it goes a little further. So he is so supportive and he never told me to shut the camera off. And I'm sure he felt it. And my family was also very supportive. I'm one of four. So it's not just me as the lone child. It's all these other voices, right?
Correct.
And everyone was very supportive. But then there lies the ethical question, right? And this happens, we've made some films with folks on the autism spectrum, nonverbal and verbal. And even when a family is saying yes, like the filmmaker still has that decision, is this right? Is this going to be good for the family? All these parties are going to be affected, by a film being put out. So, even when you get all those yeses, you still have to make that decision because you understand much better than maybe the subjects that this is going to change the course. You're playing God a little bit or whatever, because at some point when you see yourself in this story, it will affect you psychologically and it will affect how people view you or coming to you. So that's a whole thing. Luckily, I have some mentors in my life that are much older filmmakers than I was when I started this film. And I remember calling them from the hospital being, am I doing something wrong? And, that guidance, that ethical guidance is huge. I think the fact that you're asking those questions, you're already in a good spot. So you should be constantly asking those questions, But yeah, I mean, I think now it's great because my dad has this film and this story, and it's his second kind of mission in life is to help others. So it did work out, but there are some tough moments about what we want to cover because there's lots of things about my dad we didn't include in the film, even things I filmed. So my family had to make that decision on
Sure.
What pieces do we put in and what pieces are just for us.
I gotcha. Coincidentally, most people that watch my interviews know, of course, the love of my life went through cancer treatment. And I do know that there came a certain point, actually quite early on, where he said, the last thing I want to do is to keep being reminded of what's going on. So I thought about that when I was watching your film, that your father, by doing screenings, by watching this, etc., is consistently reminded of what he's lost. And that's a huge badge of courage that you need to slap on to be able to do this again and again. I notice predominantly, and that's all of your family members that are in the film, as well as your father, I don't really see a lot of anger. I don't see a lot of sadness, but what I did notice largely lingering was frustration. And maybe that's just my take on the film, but was that intentional? Is that really, if I were to ask you that one elevating emotion all of the time from you and your family, is that what it is?
Yeah, both sides, right? There's this weird thing that happens in the film where my dad is sort of leading us through this experience. So the brain injury happens to him, and yet he's the one saying, it's okay. This is what has happened, and I'm moving forward. And we're all kind of looking back and going, well, you can't remember the house we lived in, the house that I grew up in, all my siblings, that the 20 years of memories is just vanished from his mind. And the game he loves the most, golf, he played for 50 years, he doesn't remember it. And yet he's so calm with it. And there is some frustration, I think, physically for him, where he's frustrated that he's not the old version of himself. There's the blessing and the curse of him not remembering those things. And he admitted, in the film, you'll see him admit that that's kind of the beauty of how he's able to progress forward. There's a lot of frustration with us because typically with survivors of somebody who's had a brain injury, it's so sharp what they were before and what they are now, whatever those differences may be, that you never had time to process that. And so everyone in the family has different ways. And of course, my film is the way I processed it. And you see me take him back to the places he can't remember.
Right.
Ethically, again, that's a great question of, is that ethical? And I ask it a lot. But I think frustration is a key theme. And I think, being part of the brain injury community now and going to support meetings, both for my dad and myself and my family, you see that, oftentimes a lot of people struggle when you're the caretaker, when you're there, that you're just like, the whole thing is, I just want you to remember what you don't, so you can be who you used to be. But that obviously we know, like, even philosophically, that never happens, right? We're all always changing things. So
Of course.
it's definitely a key thing. And, I think I'm glad that you had that experience, because I think it's important to validate.
One of the things that stood out to me when I was watching the film is I personally, as a judge and as an audience member, say to myself, I think it's so very refreshing that you kept it very real. Most of the times when people have a family member, when they're doing a story about them, they like to keep it, how do I put it, honorable, meaning that, your parent looks in the best possible light. And you were very honest about certain things, in particular, the addiction side of things, about your father having an addictive personality. And one of the things that he actually ironically remembers is the racetrack. And I can relate to that sort of thing. Did you ever hesitate and say to yourself, maybe, just maybe, I would be better off keeping him in more of a positive light instead of maybe focusing on a less than perfect time for him?
Yeah, you think about honoring somebody, and you gloss over all these things, and it's the whole person. So the balance was important, and my whole family was supportive. Even, I think back, she's not with us anymore, but my grandmother, my dad's mom, was even very aware of Todd's shortcomings, and how that it's not just in the past. It's also easy to sort of do, oh well, so and so had this addiction and now they're better, and it's like,
Right.
no. In the film you see, and it's gray. It's like, is it good? Is it bad? Like, my mom's struggling with it, I'm struggling with it, but it was this link to the old Todd, through the racetrack. And so you kind of see that connection. And I don't know, it's like, that's how my family worked things out. Very blunt and very like, let's have a conversation about it kind of thing. And we were always the crazy family. We are always the family throwing parties and saying what you shouldn't and all that. And that's just going to be part of this film, like whether you like it or not. Like, this
Sure.
is not a typical family. This is not a typical family film.
You betcha. And would it be a fair assessment to say that the new Todd, because you reference that within the film, the new Todd, is there less of, in your opinion, less of the negative in the new Todd, or kind of the status quo at this point?
Yeah, like there's a lot there. So, what an amazing opportunity. The brain injury actually unlocked all this other things within my dad. I think leading up to the brain injury, I think he had some depression going on. His job was tanking. He lost, they were losing the house. There was foreclosed on right before he fell. There was a lot of sadness, and then kind of closed, he's closing off a little bit. And so I think that kind of shook everything up. And, of course he died and came back. So you have that going on. So yeah, I think like I've heard stories I've never heard before. I've seen facial expressions I've never seen before at my dad. It's this whole new version, good and bad. I think there's a lot of positive, but I think, with brain injury, there's also depression and sadness and, some pretty tough moments of, like having kids and, just knowing that like, and he's very aware of it. Right. So like that's hard. The next phase of this is like, okay, I have a 4 and 2-year-old and he can't do the things that he would typically do. Right. So, that's tough, but what we've learned is, we roll with it as family. So yeah, it's a lot of positive, but if people who've had brain injuries or traumatic things, it's a mixed bag. But ultimately it's a mix of the old Todd and a lot of the new. Yeah.
Would it be fair to say that his so-called rebirth has now allowed you to have more of a vigorous and vibrant new reality?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, you all kind of live through that a little bit, if you're close to somebody who's died or come close to dying and coming back. I mean, there's this whole thing that you're immediately faced with, right? So I think we all got that. And I think, within the film too, being able to dive deep with what that means, artistically, right? because I think some of the hardest things about the film for me aren't the obvious. You know, it's not the ICU, it's not the, you know, him communicating by blinking. It's like putting that together, whether it's a metaphor or whatever you want to call it, but like that visual rhythm or interpretation of that feeling. And those are the most sort of heavy moments for me watching the film. And what an awesome opportunity to be able to like do that, right? And experience all this and then have this other added thing of expression within that whole world.
Sure, you betcha. Now, obviously, you've had different screenings live, fortunately, because not everybody has had that great fortune in the last few years. Overall, how are audiences taking to the project?
Yeah, it's been great. We've screened at a bunch of amazing festivals and virtual and in person. It's been really, you know, the most surprising thing is like it's a funny film. Like there's some really funny moments. My dad's
Yes.
hilarious. So like being in an audience and hearing like, you know, a whole cinema house like roaring, laughing and having him there and standing ovation and him, you know, just knockout speech and it's great, you know, it's been very rewarding. And then the flip side is I feel like I'm in a good place mentally for it. So I think even a year or two ago I wasn't. So it's neat that it's a celebration in a lot of ways. And yeah, I've just we keep getting surprised with, you know, we didn't expect even to have this many screenings and this you know the press coverage and all that. It's all gravy. It's all great.
You betcha. And as far as if I can ask, although I'm not sure because I'm guessing every year is going to be different for Todd now, do you have a somewhat of a prognosis on how things will go for the future for him?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question. It's always a mystery. They don't really know much about the brain, right?
Right.
Jump in there, fix it, and then everything we see is that, you know, there's definitely like a slow decline, and he's experienced that. But luckily, I mean, it's been, you know, over 10 years since he fell. He still has surprised us with different things, and you see that even, you know, knowing the brain injury community, going to these meetings, and you're like, you hear somebody and they're like, I had a slur for 15 years and now I don't. And I don't know if that's going to happen to him, if there's going to be huge changes, you know, within his world. But, you know, I think as this weird thing happens too, where you end up putting in a lot of time into working on yourself when you have a major injury, which somehow prolongs in some ways your life. Like, what if he didn't have this brain injury? And what if he didn't do a good job at taking care of himself? You know,
Mm,
still, would he still be alive? I don't
sure.
know. You know, it's a weird thing. So yeah, no major thing. Just, you know, we definitely appreciate each day.
As far as for the future, people are watching this and probably saying, okay, oh my gosh, I want to see the house we lived in because now we've gotten them all excited about it. So, twofold question: if you know the next place you're going to be screening at, approximately when and where, and more importantly, at some point in time, do you envision actually showing this project to nonprofit facilities, for instance, like brain tumor associations, organizations, things like that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's a huge part of the mission, right, of this film. We do have a screening coming up. It's both virtual and in person, which is great. It's just
Okay.
amazing festival, Woods Hole Film Festival, right off of Cape Cod. So if anybody's in the area, please go. It's August 2nd in person, but there'll be first like week or so of August, you'll be able to screen virtually, and just another great festival. We've been there before, and you know some incredible films, amazing lineup within the medical world, and then even I think outside that, even personal trauma, family trauma. This film has become a little bit of a tool for folks navigating those tricky waters. So we're getting some invites, and we're going to have a big year, you know, of screening this on the nonprofit educational medical community. So we're excited to, you know, kick that off as well.
Very cool. Now, before I read off to everybody how they can find you on social media, because I found it different places, I just wanted to mention this. And of course, I've told everyone my reviews will be coming out likely at the end of this month. So I'll do a written review. And of course, this interview will be out at the same time. I'm not sure you know this. You probably do already, or maybe someone hasn't told you, but this is just from the reviewer part of me and the person. I think it's just absolutely lovely that you've provided a very gentle gift to this man. One of the things I thought about, which I'm sure you've heard, was the notebook when I watched it, because I thought to myself, I wonder when and if the time will ever come where Todd's family will sit down with him and they'll say, we're going to watch a movie about this absolutely lovely man who had a beautiful life and some sad circumstances, and help him remember each new Todd that comes every year. It's a great gift you've given him. So bravo, well done.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're quite welcome.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Okay, Tim O'Donnell is his name, in case you couldn't see it on the Zoom thing there. I'm going to read a bunch of these off and just let me know if I missed anything. Tim is on Vimeo. He is on LinkedIn. He has a personal Facebook page. The Instagram, as well as the website, is Pixel. It's Pixela, and then Pictura, Pictura.com. And on that website, you'll also find information on the housewelived.in.com, which is a part of that. And of course, the House We Lived In also has a Facebook page as well. Did I miss anything?
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Oh my God, I got everything. Look at that. All right. Todd, thank you so much for joining me today.